For over 50 years, she stayed silent. The world moved on, the bat signal faded, and the fans assumed the story had ended. But now, at 89, Julie Newmar, the unforgettable Catwoman of the 1960s, has finally revealed what really happened. "You left after 1 year," they said. "I didn't leave," she answered. "They forgot where I went." With those haunting words, she opened a door to the past that had been locked for decades. And at the center of it all was Adam West, the legendary Batman. What really went on behind the scenes of one of TV's most iconic shows? Why did Julie disappear so suddenly? And what secret has she carried all these years? Today, she's ready to tell the truth. And it might change everything you thought you knew about Gotham's greatest duo. And what she revealed left even longtime fans stunned. Why now? Why had she kept it buried for so long? The truth cuts deeper than anyone imagined. In the shimmering glow of 1960s television, few shows defined a generation like Batman. Airing from 1966 to 1968, it wasn't just a show, it was a phenomenon. With its campy style, vibrant colors, and larger-than-life villains, it leaped off the comic book pages and straight into living rooms across America. But beneath all the flashing lights and pow effects, it was the undeniable chemistry between the show's two brightest stars that made it timeless. Adam West brought Batman to life with a mix of noble charm and dry wit that became the blueprint for every caped crusader that followed. But it was Julie Newmar as Catwoman who stole the spotlight. With a sultry purr and a knowing smile, she didn't just play a villain, she embodied a character who blurred the lines between danger and desire. Their scenes crackled with tension, flirtatious, witty, and full of a silent understanding that something deeper was always bubbling just beneath the surface. Julie's Catwoman wasn't just a criminal, she was enigmatic, smart, and strangely sympathetic. And Adam's Batman, for all his black and white morality, couldn't quite figure her out, or stay away. Their dynamic was magnetic, a dance of opposites that hinted at love, rivalry, and everything in between. But now, decades later, Julie finally lifts the veil on what was really going on, not just on screen, but behind it. And once you hear it, you'll never look at Gotham's most iconic duo the same way again. Behind the scenes, the chemistry between them wasn't just noticed, it sparked whispers that never faded. Crew members watched closely, co-stars raised eyebrows, and the question lingered like a shadow in the Batcave: were Adam and Julie simply great actors, or was there something more smoldering beneath the surface? As Batman ascended from quirky primetime show to cult legend, that mystery deepened. Pop culture scholars, comic book enthusiasts, and die-hard fans continued to ask, was there ever anything real between Julie Newmar and Adam West? Adam, ever the charismatic showman, kept fans entertained with stories, reflections, and signature charm, never dodging the spotlight. Julie, on the other hand, played it differently. She wore her fame like a velvet glove, gracefully and with control. She attended conventions, smiled for photos, and talked about Catwoman with elegance and wit. But whenever Adam's name came up, her demeanor shifted. Her responses grew shorter, more reserved. It was never unkind, just guarded. As if the real story between them had been packed away like a lost reel of film. For decades, that vault stayed closed. Because filming Batman was no ordinary job. It demanded relentless energy, over-the-top theatrics, and a rhythm only the sharpest could keep up with. But it was also a rare playground for actors who didn't take themselves too seriously. On that neon-lit set, Adam West was the calm center, a man whose dry humor could diffuse tension or light up a room. Julie, always composed and enigmatic, matched him move for move. They weren't just acting. They were dancing a tightrope between fiction and reality, and now, for the first time in decades, Julie is ready to finally reveal what truly lay beneath that iconic cat and bat connection. Even in between takes, he hardly ever deviated from his character and added a nuanced intellect to a part that could have easily turned into a farce. Julie, on the other hand, offered a surprising spark. She was fearless, creative, and exuded an air of constantly knowing more than she revealed. Their scenes were sizzling together. It immediately caught the attention of the directors and crew. Adam's tendency to look at something for too long. The way Julie would make a single word sound inviting by curling it. They had their own chemistry, but the sentences came from the screenplay. However, things were more tricky off camera. Personal time was scarce due to the hectic schedule of the event. The cast frequently characterized the environment as both professional and light-hearted. Although they had a good relationship, Julie and Adam never seemed particularly close outside of work. There are only two stars performing their roles and then parting ways. There are no passionate mutterings or long farewells at the end of the day. That's what everyone believed, anyway. Later, Julie referred to those times as a sort of dream. She recalled the hilarity in between takes, the colorful sets, and the costumes. However, she frequently smiled cryptically or shifted the topic when questioned directly about Adam. She once remarked, "He was very good at what he did, and he was skilled at keeping secrets." Even back then, there were some noteworthy moments. Adam is said to have brought Julie a single rose in between sequences on one especially lengthy session. Not ostentatious, just considerate. On another occasion, the crew quietly laughed when she stopped the camera to help him straighten out a section of his utility belt that had gone awry. The two never discussed it publicly, but these brief exchanges suggested a deeper connection, a silent understanding, perhaps even admiration. Not even decades later, not in memoirs, nor in interviews. Fans noticed, of course, after the world had long forgotten the vibrant streets of Gotham. They always do. On forums, conspiracy ideas surfaced. We rewatched, slowed down, and examined old clips. There were many who believed that Julie and Adam had disclosed a private matter that needed to be kept secret at the time. Others attributed it to nostalgia and outstanding performances. But regardless of what was or wasn't between them, they all agreed on one thing. It never went away completely. The mystery of what actually transpired between Batman and Catwoman persisted even after repeats were shown for younger audiences. What was the reason behind Julie's prolonged silence? The ensemble dispersed like smoke from a rooftop chase as Batman came to an end in 1968. Adam West was TYP cast, bound to the cowl and cape for all time. Despite having trouble landing major roles, he eventually accepted the tradition and rose to fame in voice acting and at fan gatherings. He transformed a formerly restrictive mark into a crown by leaning into the memories. Julie Newmar did not follow the same route. By pursuing theater, literature, and eventually invention, she disassociated herself from the part that brought her fame. She turned into something of a mystery. Still glamorous and admired, but becoming more and more secretive. Additionally, she always resurfaced on her own terms. Adam and Julie were occasionally spotted together at the same events over the years, particularly as the Batman cult grew in size. However, there was always a gap. There was a calm reserve between them, a formality, a boundary neither of them appeared eager to breach, in contrast to other celebrity reunions when former co-stars embraced and reminisced openly. When Julie spoke about her time as Catwoman, she frequently talked about the choreography, costumes, and how much fun she had playing the part. However, she rarely discussed Adam West, and when she did, her responses were always succinct. Yes, respectful, yet aloof. She commended his professionalism. She repeatedly referred to him as a gentleman, but they were the cautious, almost scripted, kind of remarks. Interviewers noticed, as did fans. Adam, however, was more forthcoming. He never uttered a negative word for his co-stars and frequently talked about how much fun it was to work on Batman. He described Julie as exquisite and completely distinct in a few late interviews. He never, however, alluded to anything more profound. The subject seemed to be surrounded by an imperceptible border. Even after Adam passed away in 2017, this quiet persisted for decades through Q&A sessions at comic conventions, television retrospectives, and more. Julie said very little. Naturally, she sent a thoughtful homage, a brief, beautiful note conveying her appreciation and thanks. However, it omitted more than it revealed. She held back, but why? Some thought she was just private. Some conjectured that their relationship, in whatever form it had been, was too intricate or intimate to distill to mere platitudes. However, the lack of clarification only stoked interest. Julie shared virtually nothing until subtly things started to shift in a world where superstars frequently disclosed too much. Subtle indications that something was changing were present, though not all at once. As she got closer to her late 80s, she started to talk more candidly in interviews. Her voice grew softer. Her tales grew increasingly introspective. And the walls she had constructed started to crumble, piece by piece. There was a change. And Julie Newmar appeared prepared to speak the truth for the first time in more than half a century. Like hints in an old detective tale, there were indications long before any official acknowledgement, little incidents spaced out over decades. Most folks didn't notice them. A few listened, but they don't construct a clearer picture until now. Words were never a problem for Julie Newmar. She didn't say much, but it made an impression. She made sporadic appearances at fan gatherings in the 1980s and 1990s. She frequently responded to questions about Adam West with a raised eyebrow or a light-hearted smirk. She once said, "He was very Batman," leaving the audience to deduce what she meant. She remembers Adam's professionalism on set in another interview from the early 2000s. "Too professional sometimes," she said, almost as an afterthought. That was the issue. Later, she laughed, but gave no explanation. The interviewer went on. No, fans didn't. As time went on, Julie felt more at ease discussing Catwoman's cultural influence. She talked about elegance, empowerment, and striking a balance between appeal and danger. However, Adam's name remained an uncommon occurrence in her stories, like to a character that was absent from a well-known story. There were other written works. Julie was a gifted writer who frequently shared her thoughts and articles online. She spoke of a man who never expressed his feelings but whose silence spoke louder than words in an homage to classic Hollywood romances. Fans conjectured, but she never named him. Julie maintained her composure even in the 2000s and 2010s, when interest in the Batman series was on the rise. She shared experiences with grace when sitting next to other cast members in documentaries and retrospectives. She either turned to safer recollections, costumes, stunts, lighting, and lipstick, or she resorted to complimenting the show when questioned directly about Adam. But her voice would catch a couple times. For a little while, her expression would shift as if she had strayed into a recollection and wasn't sure whether to stay or back off. Then, in 2016, a year before Adam's death, a specific panel was presented. Julie was asked by a fan if she ever harbored romantic thoughts for her co-star. The audience held its breath. Julie paused, grinned, and spoke quietly. Something lovely was there. However, sometimes beauty is meant to be fleeting. It wasn't precisely a confession, but it was the closest she had ever been to revealing the truth. Julie wrote a message on the internet following Adam West's passing in 2017. It was poetic and brief. Behind the mask, you had a heart too full to talk, yet you wore the cape with honor. There were no further interviews or explanations, just that. The clues were still coming in. The way she talked, the things she didn't say, and the apparent sadness that followed the mention of his name. For a long time, she had carried something that was unsaid but never forgotten, and eventually it weighed too much for her to keep to herself. Julie Newmar outlived almost all of the shining lights of her time by the time she was 89. She still maintained her elegance. That obvious serenity was still in her voice. But she had changed in some way. A new level of transparency regarding her life and career was evident in recent public appearances and interviews. She had started discussing legacy, memory, and aging more. Her thoughts shifted inside. Fans noticed a quiet urgency in the manner she advised tales, as if she knew her time to tell them changed into running brief. It turned into for the duration of a live-streamed Q&A, part of a virtual fan birthday party, that the turning factor came. The consultation was casual, mild-hearted questions on costumes, stunts, and favorite episodes. Then someone asked, as they continually did, approximately Adam West, however this time the tone of the question changed into extraordinary. It became gentle, nearly reverent. Is there something you usually desire to say to Adam, but in no way got the danger? Julie paused. The host moved to the following query, but she lifted her hand slowly and spoke. Yes, she stated. There's. She seemed off digicam for a moment, gathering herself. You attain a factor in life, she continued, in which silence will become heavier than the reality. And I've carried this one lengthy enough. That become when the room changed. The target audience, the host, anyone knew they had been approximately to hear something they'd by no means heard earlier than. Julie stated she had loved running with Adam. She renowned him deeply, both on Creen and Rancid, but it became more than that. There has been a time, she said, after I needed he had checked out me now not as Catwoman, however simply as Julie, and that I think perhaps he did, however neither folk said it. The admission was tender, not dramatic, now not scandalous, however sincere. She went on to describe how the timing had by no means been right. How they had each been careful, how careers and reputations, specifically in that era, came earlier than emotions. We were icons earlier than we have been people. She said that became the rate. While requested why she became choosing to speak now, she simply said, because love, even unspoken, deserves a voice. There were no gasps, no headlines screaming controversy, only a quiet second that hung inside the digital air like a curtain finally being drawn. Julie smiled after her phrases. Not a smile of relief, however certainly one of peace. For many years, fanatics had speculated. Writers had guessed. Clips were dissected. But the fact became far simpler and a ways extra human than anyone had imagined. At 89, she had nothing left to shield. And so, at final, she advised the reality. What Julie Newmar discovered became not scandalous. It was not the kind of revelation that made tabloid headlines or viral tweets, however it became in its personal quiet way earth-shattering for those who had watched, questioned, and waited. She did now not claim a mystery romance. There were no hidden letters or clandestine meetings. What she shared became more diffused and possibly more powerful. A portrait of love that became felt but in no way pursued. A connection that lingered in glances, pauses, and unstated expertise. In a Comply With Up interview, she stated, "We have been both superb at playing roles on display and in lifestyles, however I continually wondered what would possibly have befell if we had stopped performing." Julie admitted she had feelings for Adam. Not a overwhelm, not a passing enchantment, however something deeper, something that lived quietly under the floor, by no means acted upon, however constantly gift. He had a disappointment in his eyes every now and then. She said, like he was attempting to find something, however by no means pretty saying what it changed into. She discovered that in their time on Batman, they shared lengthy conversations between takes, not about scripts or stunts, however approximately lifestyles, desires, and fears. He once informed me, she recalled that the hardest part of playing Batman turned into pretending to be brave while he felt something however. Julie had in no way forgotten that. They were close, she stated, but continually saved a positive distance, partially because of the instances. They have been operating underneath strict studio scrutiny. In part due to situation, however also, she admitted, due to worry. In reality, she seemed thankful. Some things are stunning because they by no means turn out to be actual, she said. They live in memory, unspoiled. The revelation moved fanatics no longer as it showed rumors, however because it gave voice to something rarely mentioned, the silent, sensitive relationships that may outline a lifestyles without ever becoming one. Many viewers reached out after her assertion, sharing their personal memories of unspoken love, of connections that got here and went without rationalization. Julie, usually the considerate artist, answered by writing a quick essay online titled What We in No Way Said. In it, she defined her feelings not as remorse, however as reverence. Adam West, for his element, never stated such emotions publicly. However, searching back now at the interviews, the tone in his voice when he cited her, it's far hard now not to look the echoes, the softness, the quiet understanding. The truth Julie in the end shared did no longer rewrite records. It illuminated it. It solid a mild light on figures we knew, revealing the tenderness that had continually been there, simply out of frame. When the very last curtain falls, what stays is not simply the roles actors played, but the manner they made us sense. For Adam West and Julie Newmar, their legacy turned into in no way limited to Gotham metropolis. It stretched far past the capes and claws, attaining into the hearts of folks who watched them dance across the screen in a strange, lovely recreation of cat and bat. Their chemistry helped redefine what TV should do. In a time of inflexible stereotypes and clean-cut heroes, they introduced complexity. Julie's Catwoman changed into not a villain to be defeated. She became a force to be reckoned with, widespread, and on occasion even understood. Adam's Batman became not just a do-gooder in tights. He changed into thoughtful, conflicted, and as Julie later revealed, quietly human. Together, they became greater than characters. They have become symbols. But, it's Miles the humanity in the back of the mask that now lingers. Julie's past due lifestyle's confession did no longer tarnish their legacy. It enriched it. It gave fanatics a final puzzle piece, a way to apprehend what had continually been simply out of reach. Within the years on the grounds that Adam's passing, tributes have persevered to pour in. Statues, lively cameos, books, and podcasts all rejoice his contribution to pop culture. He's remembered because the Batman who in no way wanted darkness to be taken critically, the hero who ought to smile. Julie, too, has embraced her legacy greater completely. In interviews and essays, she now speaks with a combination of wit and information, unafraid to mirror on what become and what could have been. Her revelation approximately Adam West has sparked new appreciation for his or her Bond. Fanatics rewatch vintage episodes with fresh eyes, catching glances they as soon as missed, strains that now deliver double meaning. However, perhaps the maximum lasting impact isn't the mystery they kept, however the grace with which they stored it. In a world driven by means of oversharing and fast headlines, there's become a story instructed in silence, in restraint, in dignity. They chose privateness when the arena craved gossip. They held on to something sacred, now not because it become forbidden, however as it changed into fragile. And when Julie sooner or later selected to speak, she did so no longer to stir controversy or declare interest, however to honor a connection that formed her lifestyles. She gave fans something uncommon. Closure wrapped in tenderness. And in doing so reminded the sector that stories do now not cease when the display screen fades to black. They evolve, they breathe, and once in a while they quietly look ahead to the proper moment to be advised. What stays now could be a sort of poetry, a reminder that some of the innermost relationships aren't people who result in romance, however those that linger quietly in memory, unchanged, unspoiled, and unforgettable. Batman and Catwoman might also have played a game of cat and mouse on display screen, but behind the masks there have been two people imperfect, courageous, and maybe, simply maybe, a bit in love. And that fact shared at remaining is perhaps the maximum beautiful legacy of all. Because in the long run, what we keep in mind most are not the devices, no longer the stunts, no longer even the traces, however the glances, the silences, and the truths we stock with us lengthy after the credits roll.